We're on our series called Stories of the Bible. And what a great story today. It's probably the most famous story in all of the Bible, which is David and Goliath. You will find it in 1 Samuel chapter 17. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you, similar to last time, a little bit of a summary of the story, just because it's a very long, it's about 56 verses. And that might be too long to read over here for you right now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a summary of the story, and then we're going to talk about it. But this is what happened in David and Goliath, if you're not aware, although my guess is many of you are aware of the story of David and Goliath. Long ago, the people of Israel were at war with the Philistines. And two armies stood on two mountains with a valley between them. And from the Philistine camp came a giant named Goliath. He was over 9 feet tall, armed in bronze from head to foot, 9 feet tall. Every morning and every evening for 40 days, Goliath shouted across the valley and defied the armies of Israel. And he would say to them, "Send a man for me to fight. And if he wins, we will serve you. But if I win, you will then serve us." And King Saul and all of his men heard these words, and they were really afraid at the threat of Goliath. And meanwhile, far away from the battlefield, there was a boy in the fields of Bethlehem, a young shepherd by the name of David, keeping and tending his sheep. And 3 of his older brothers had gone to fight in the war with Saul, but David was the youngest of 8 brothers, and so he stayed behind to look after the sheep. And one day his father Jesse sent David to the camp to bring food for his brothers and bring back news from them. And so when David arrived at the camp, he heard Goliath's challenge. Every day Goliath would come and taunt the armies of Israel. And so David was standing there, and he heard the taunts of Goliath, and he saw all the men of Israel were afraid. And so David asked, "Who is this man that he should defy the armies of the living God?" But his older brother Eliab was angry with him and said, "Why have you really come down here? I know the evil of your heart. You are proud. So go back and take care of the sheep." But the other soldier said to David, "The king will give riches and his daughter." So the king would give his own daughter in marriage to the man who kills this giant. And so when King Saul heard about David, he sent for him. And David comes before King Saul and says, "Let nobody in Israel lose heart because of Goliath. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." And Saul says back to him, "But you're only a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." So David then shares his testimony with King Saul and says, "I've been a shepherd all these years, and when a lion and bear would come and attack my sheep, I would grab that lion and defeat it. And this Philistine will be just the same for me." And so Saul finally agrees, and he dresses David in his own armor with a bronze helmet and a coat of mail and a sword at his side. But David couldn't walk in it. And so he says to him, "I cannot go in this armor, for I have not tested it." And so he takes off the armor, and instead he goes to the river. He chooses 5 smooth stones. He gets his sling and a staff, and he puts it in his shepherd pouch. And then he begins to walk into the valley. So remember the visual. There was one army on one mountain and another army on another mountain, and there was a valley in between them. So he begins to walk down into that valley. And just as a fun fact, that valley is known as the Valley of God. And so he goes and walks into the Valley of God by himself, and there he faces Goliath. And when Goliath sees him, he laughs and says, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks and with stones?" And then he began to curse David by his gods. But instead, David responds back and said, "You come at me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, whom you have defied." And so David said to Goliath with a sling in his hand, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands." And for the battle is not mine, but the battle belongs to God. And David then ran towards the giant with his sling in his hand. He took out a stone and he swung it. And the stone struck Goliath in his forehead. The giant fell face down on the ground. David ran and stood over Goliath and took out his own sword. And with that sword he cut his head off. Can I just deviate for a moment? AI didn't allow me to generate very violent. So when I said cut his head off, it said error. We do not condone violence. Just as a fun fact. But when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled from the scene. And all the men of Israel rose and shouted and ran after them. And that was the day the shepherd boy brought victory to all of Israel. A true king in the making. Great story. Probably one of my favorite. I'm biased. It's probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. And I want to talk to you today about how do we overcome the giants in our life. We read stories like this and say, like David, we will face our own Goliaths. But how do we overcome the challenges that seem like giants in your life? Let me start off by saying, many times we think in order to face our giants, we need to have more and more faith. But what I want to suggest to you through this story is that it's not really a lack of faith. What it is a hearing issue. And here's what I mean by this. We live in a noisy world. Every day when we wake up in the morning, you hear your alarm clock, you grab your phone, you'll either hit snooze or you'll swipe and actually turn off your alarm. And what do you do after that? You see your notifications. Oh, I got this WhatsApp, and I got that message, and I got that email, and that thing on Instagram, and then I check that first reel, and then I swipe to the next one, and then I get up from that bed probably immediately or 20 minutes later, and then I go to the washroom, and there in the washroom, you will continue to scroll. And then just before you go to bed, you will also continue to scroll. And so we are constantly living in a noisy world. More than every other generation in the past, the noise of the world today is deafening. And in that endless scrolling, you're consuming more and more information that is telling you how you should think, how you should live your life, what you should be, what success is, that you passively consume. And in the midst of all of that, hearing God is very difficult. In the midst of the lives that we live, hearing God is hard. It is a tough thing because we're surrounded by noise all the time. Silent in here, but we're still surrounded by noise all the time. And we're hearing so many voices all at once. And so what I want to show you from this story, many times when we look at this story, we think, if I just have more faith and I be like David, then I will face my Goliath and conquer over him. But I want to show you from the story 5 voices that David had to deal with, that he heard while he was fighting Goliath. 5 voices, and these are the types of voices that we hear all the time. Not the voices in your head, oftentimes the voices from outside, but 5 voices that David heard, and ones that we should consider. Voice number 1, the voice of Goliath, which was the voice of intimidation. The voice that will always tell you that you are not enough. This is what it said. In verse 8, it said, "Behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came out of the ranks and shouted there to the ranks of Israel." And essentially what he told them is that, send somebody to fight me. 9 feet tall mammoth of a man, way bigger than me, came out there, and Jeff, can I pick on you? David was probably, let's just assume David was the size of Jeff, not the biggest guy, and he stands in front of David and says, fight me. And then he goes on to say, if I win, you will serve us. But if you win, we will serve you, though it's very unlikely that you will win. And it says that all the Israelites were dismayed and greatly afraid, and David heard him. David heard his threats. He heard the voice. Let me go on and say that many times the things we hear cause us to fear. Oh, if you don't get into this college, you will be nothing in life. If you don't reach this thing by this age, if you're not married by 30, there is no one for you. What are the other things people say? Oh, if you don't have, this much saved up in life, then you will die and be broke. You will not have enough. You will struggle. If you don't get into this company, then you have no future. If you don't get into IIT, then what are you really doing with your life? And so every time we hear these voices, and it causes us to feel insignificant. It causes us to begin to fear that I have no future. And whatever it is we fear, ultimately we will then begin to serve that thing. A very famous theologian called Tim Keller, sadly passed away now, but wrote a book, and in his book he said, whatever we fear in our heart, that we will serve as God. Voices that you listen to will cause you to fear. For some of us, we fear lack. I always need to be making more and more and more money and saving up more and more and more money, because I never want to reach a point in my life where I do not have enough. I never want to reach a point in my life where I am struggling and I cannot pay the bills. I'm scared of lack. For other people, it's rejection. I have been rejected for so long that I will do anything to fit in. I will do absolutely anything for people to accept me, because I don't want them to reject me. And yet in reality, in Proverbs, it tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Meaning what it's saying is that we fear so many things in life, but if I can manage to fear God more than I fear lack, I will always trust in God and not have to worry. If I fear God more than I fear rejection, then I can live for Him without having to compromise every time my friends push me in a certain direction. If I fear God more than I fear the lack of comfort, then even when life is hard, I can still hold on to Him and not constantly give up and walk away. But here's one thing we have to realize when it comes to thinking about voices and noises and living in the world that we do. Sometimes we might not believe the things we scroll on, but we're just constantly scrolling and listening to it and listening to it. And the more we listen to things, it begins to shape our life. I'm sad to say, but some years ago, I had to do counseling for a person, and she was so scared that even when she stood in the shower with shampoo on her head, she would not be able to close her eyes. Because the moment she would close her eyes, she would feel like something is coming to get her. When she would go to sleep at night, leave the lights on and sleep in the brightness the whole night. Why? We later found out is that she would watch horror movies again and again and again and again. And it's just entertainment, David. It's just fun. I'm just teaching myself how to fear, and now it so rules my life that I cannot get over it. Whatever you consistently listen to will shape you. And that's why we see the Israelites stood over there for 40 days. That was quite a long time. For over a month, both the armies stood against each other on their own mountains, and Goliath would come out and shout the same threat every single day, twice a day for 40 days. 80 times they heard the same message over and over and over again, I'm going to come and kill you. And then all of you are going to be slaves to us. And they heard that message so many times that they began to fundamentally believe it in their heart. And it ruled them. What are the things that you listen to over and over and over again? Some of us have gone through that breakup and you go back and you read that message over and over and over again about how you are no good and nobody really wants to be with you. about how you have no future and you will always be this way. That was the voice of intimidation. But let's look at the voice of the soldiers, which was the voice of distraction. In verse 24, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, for they were very much afraid. And they were talking about Goliath here. And then it goes on and it says in 25, and the king will enrich the man who kills Goliath with great riches. Then it goes on further and says, and he will also give him his daughter. You will be the king's son-in-law. And based on what your favorite thing on this list is, the last thing is you will never have to pay taxes again. So for some people, that's probably the game changer. So he will make you rich. You will marry probably the most eligible bachelorette in all of Israel, and you won't have to pay tax. That is a wonderful opportunity. And yet what it was everybody else's definition of success. And so what they were basically feeding into David's mind is, man, if you do this, you will be successful in our eyes. When really what David was trying to do was walk in God's purpose. You will be wealthy. You will be rich. You will have everything you want. You will be with the woman of your dreams. And so they were offering him the right thing. Go and fight Goliath, but for the wrong reason. Many times we chase after goals and we're not really sure why. Like, how many of you want to be rich? You don't have to raise your hand, but think it. And immediately there's a yes that's gone on in your head. Yes. Why? I'm not saying be poor. But when you have that money in your bank account, what kind of person will you be? Or is it just money because you feel like if I earn a certain amount and I have that in my possession, then it defines me a certain way? Success with no meaning. Success with no purpose. It's not bad, but it'll always distract you. Can I just deviate for a second and be slightly mean? Look, I'm not against ambitious people. I would consider myself to be one of them. Sometimes, though, the goals we set for ourselves, we just make it up. Right? Like, why do you really want that job? I don't know. I feel like when I get that job, then I'll be happy. Why do you need that, that 100th degree? All the other degrees don't define me enough. So, education is an investment, David. Oh, you need a car. Why do you need that car? Because when people see me on the street and I don't know them and they don't know me, maybe they'll think I'm something better. Not bad, but oftentimes in order to attain those things, we actually give up our relationship with God and He comes last in our life because we're so busy chasing goals that we don't even know why we made to begin with. That's it, I'll stop there. But verse number 3. The voice of his brother, and this is the voice of condemnation. So David is standing there in the camp of the Israelite army. And over there, his brother Eliab, his oldest brother. How many of you have great relationships with your siblings? If any of you are, I'm the youngest of 3 and I have 2 older sisters. And they were actually pretty good siblings. But I don't know how it was with you. But siblings tend to have opinions on how you should live your life. Everybody say amen. Siblings have opinions on how you should be. And so Eliab comes to David and says, man, I really think that you belong with those sheep. And just in chapter 16, the prophet Samuel comes to the house of Jesse and anoints David as king in front of all of his brothers. So that would have hurt their ego. And then in the very next chapter, he's over here standing before Goliath. And instead of his brother saying, come on, David, we believe in you, it's like, no, David, you are evil and go back to the sheep because that's where you belong. Why are you trying to go any further in life? Don't you know your place? Like, who do you really think you are? Which is ironic, because oftentimes people will see us basis our past, but God will, when He looks at you, He will always look at you basis your future. Let me say that again. Many times when people see you, they will see you basis everything you have done in the past, all the mistakes you've ever made, they think you are like. And yet when God looks at you, because He knows the beginning from the end, He will always look at you based on who you will be. Which is why He could go to a young shepherd boy and say, you will be king. When everybody else saw him and said, you will probably forever be a shepherd. How often do we hold so closely the things that people say to us? And our identity, our insecurities, our worries, the way we see ourselves is oftentimes defined by the people that are closest to us. That sibling, that parent, that teacher, that close friend that wasn't such a good friend. We all face condemnation sometimes. And sadly, it's from the people that are closest to us. The other day I was driving and I cut a person off, and I didn't intend to. I kind of did my mistake, and so he kind of came on the other side of me and he flipped me off, and then he kept driving. Guess what? That didn't hurt my feelings at all. Why? I'll probably never see him again. But when that relative, when that loved one, when that relationship that you thought would last says that thing about you, suddenly something inside of you shatters. The voice of condemnation. Number fourth voice that David had to deal with is what I call as the voice of reason. Practical, realistic assessment of the situation. So he goes to King Saul, and there in front of King Saul, he says, let me go and fight Goliath. Let nobody in Israel be afraid and lose heart. I will fight him. And King Saul gives him very realistic assessment where he says, look, David, you're too young. He's probably 16, 17 years old. You're too young. You're quite small. He's a giant, and he's been training for this for a long time. You cannot do this. Was that true? Yeah, it was true. David was small. He was young. He was inexperienced. And the irony is that many times with the content we consume, I work in AI, so let me just explain to you if you don't know how algorithms work. The way algorithms work is that it kind of, it's largely just data collection. So wherever you choose to scroll and you stay on that video for longer, it understands what the topic of that video is and then just gives you more videos like that. Whatever it is you stop and listen to, you begin to hear more of. That's algorithms in a nutshell. And so you hear things again and again and again and again, and it seems true, just like Saul. David, I don't think you're ready. You're too young. You're too small. You're not good enough. You're not great enough. I don't think this is your purpose. And you just keep recycling it over and over and over again. Because it is true, but it's just not God's truth. It seems true, it seems practical, it is just not truth. There's a difference. What God says is truth. The word of the Lord will come to pass, and yet people will always seem to define you by what seems practical. And so David goes back to Saul and says, look, Your servant has struck down both lion and bear. The Lord will deliver me from the paw. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will also deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And so he kind of shares his testimony to King Saul. And so King Saul said, "Go, and may the Lord be with you in this fight." How did David convince the king? What did he say? Yeah. He basically said, "Look, the past seasons of my life have made me ready." In other words, nothing I have gone through in the past was a waste of time. It wasn't pleasant, but God used it. However old you are right now, when you look back over the years of your life, do you feel like, man, some things were just a waste? I just wasted my life. Maybe God was using it. David spent years walking around bushes in the wilderness, feeding sheep, recognized by nobody, appreciated by nobody, not in the limelight, no respect, no honor, there was no aspiration. And yet that insignificant season of his life is what actually made him ready. How do you look at your life? Do you look at your life right now? I just feel like I'm wasting my time. I don't even know what I'm doing. I hate it when people ask me, "What do you do?" Because what am I really going to say? Maybe in God's eyes it's not a waste of time. Maybe He's actually preparing you for something great. Maybe He actually wants to use you in a great way, and what's happening in your life right now is perfectly shaping you and making you the person that God wants you to be. But here's the part we have to realize. If we don't remember what God has done, we will have no faith for what God can do. Let me explain what that means. David stood before there in front of Saul and said, "What you're saying seems true. I am young. I am smaller than him. He does seem more experienced than me. But when I look back over my life, God has done many great things. And if He could do it then, He can do it now." Can I tell you a practical challenge that people face? How many of you have prayed for something and you got it? Yeah, you prayed for an admission and you got that admission. And it might have been like a miracle. You didn't think you deserve it and yet you got it. And then you finished the 3 years of college and now you're sitting for placements. And once again, you're praying for something, hoping you get it. But because you don't actually take the time to remember that God helped you the last time, all your faith in the moment is gone. Not because God has never been good to you, it's just because I don't actually take the effort to remember all the times that He's been good to me. One of my mentors used to say, and I found it funny, but it's true. He said, if you have experienced a breakthrough in something, you lose the right to complain. Meaning, if you've ever prayed that God will give you a job and you got it, you got that job that you thought you would never get and yet you got it somehow. And years pass, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and now you're looking for another job because now you want to go even further in life. And once again, you are in that hopeless situation where you feel like, man, I don't know if anything will work out for me. There's no hope. Why do we stay in those cycles? And part of the reason why we stay in those cycles is because we don't actually remember what God has done in the past. And so we need to survive on everybody else's testimony when we have our own testimony. Every month, people come up here and they share their testimony, and I appreciate it. It's a good thing. But actually, you have the ability in your own life to encourage yourself by looking at what God has already done for you. but it's only if we remember what happened in the past. And finally, the last voice that David had to hear, and I'll go faster now, was the voice of advice. Practical, good advice from other people on how you should be. So Saul agrees to let David fight, and then he says, well, man, if you're going to go fight, at least use my armor. Like, you're probably going to die. He's probably going to kill you, but at least die in style. So use my armor. Use my sword. Use my armor. Use all of my stuff. It worked for me, so probably it can work for you. Take my advice. Use all this and go. And David says no. He tried it on. He considered his advice. But then he takes it off and says, I've not really tested this. I know how God has prepared me. God prepared me as a shepherd in the wilderness. And so I will go based on how God prepared me. So then he goes and he gets a slick shot. Not a great strategy. Like, he gave up the sword to get a slingshot. And said, I will go based how God has led me, not based on your advice. And we see this moment where there's godly wisdom versus human wisdom. In human wisdom, Saul said, David should use my armor because this is what humans do and this is what always works. And yet God's wisdom said, no, David should go in the way that I have prepared him, and I prepared him as a shepherd in the wilderness. Differences of opinions, and when we face those differences of opinions, we feel the pressure to please the people around us, because usually advice comes from the people close to you, right? How many of you have parents that have decided how your entire life should go? Oh, be glad if you don't. I was talking to someone this weekend, and they were telling me, man, you just don't know my dad. My dad has decided what I'm going to study. He's decided, what I'm going to study after I finish studying, and then what job I'll take, and then where I'll live and what I'll do. And I feel like I'm living his life. Good advice. Seriously, good advice. But not every voice that wants to help you is the voice that you should listen to. If David took Saul's advice, what would have happened to him? He'd have likely died. Couldn't move, couldn't really fight. Not suited for him. It made sense for Saul, not suited for him. And so David considered his advice, but then said, no. I know you're just trying to help me, but this is the way that God is leading me, and I appreciate what you are saying, but I believe that God is leading me this way. How do you make your decisions? Who do I marry? What do I study? What job should I take? Where should I live? What should I do? What car you should buy? Whatever it is. Whatever decisions you make, how do you make them? Let's think about the more important ones. Usually that's relationship and career and where you go in life. Do you make it where you're trying to please everybody else, even when you know in your heart that's not really what God is wanting to lead you in? Because sometimes to follow God, people will be offended. And man, I want you to do this. This is what we've always done. And you're doing that. But if we live to please them, we will always struggle to obey God. And let me skip forward. I'll read quickly. So the Philistine looked at David, and when he saw him, he was disdained, for he was but a youth. And so he began to insult David. He looked at him and he abused him and insulted him by his gods, and he cursed at him. And yet, in verse 45, David says to him, you come at me with sword and spear and with a javelin, but I come at you, and I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give, this is graphic, I will give your dead bodies to the hosts of the wilderness of the Philistines this day, and the birds of the air will eat you. Like they were really trash talking each other, and I'll kill you and I'll make the animals eat you. So if you ever get into a fight with someone, feel free to use that line. But I like this part. He says, and then all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. All the earth will know that God is true, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Notice that he didn't even bother defending himself. Like all the insults, it's a waste of time to get defensive. I'm fighting you in the name of the Lord. And here's what finally happened. So the Philistine arose and came and drew near and to meet David, and David ran quickly towards him in the battle line. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. And so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and it struck the Philistine and it killed him. So in the midst of all those noises, essentially what David had to do was realize, so many noises, so many voices, but I will fix my eyes on God. I do not come against you with sword and spear. I come against you in the name of the Lord. And he fixed his eyes on God and came and fought that battle, and he won. But here's the funny thing. There were so many voices in the story. Where was God's voice in all of this? Great victory. Greatest story in the Bible. The secular books written about it. The business books written about it. The self-help books written about it. There's a very famous book called David and Goliath, which is a management consulting book. But where was God in this story? What did God actually say? If you read the whole chapter of 1 Samuel 17, you'll actually realize that God said nothing. Not once in the entire 50-something verses, God spoke at all. He was silent the whole time. He didn't say anything. But in reality, everybody was saying something, and what David was doing is he was hearing them, and through all their noise, he was actually hearing God. In the midst of all the noise, in the midst of all the opinions of the world, David was hearing God. I'll show you how. What was Goliath saying? I defy the armies of Israel. What was God saying to David? Who's this that defies the armies of Israel? Who's this that really defies the armies of the living God? What were the soldiers saying? Man, you should go and fight. Do it for the reward. And what was God saying? No, you actually have a purpose in life. Don't care about the reward. I am your reward. Follow me, and that is the purpose of your life. That is the true reward. What was the brother saying? You are just a shepherd. Go back to your sheep. And yet God was saying that though you are a shepherd, I am preparing you for something greater. Divine perspective. When people say things to you, are you able to cut through the noise and actually hear the voice of God through the words of man? Because in reality, God said nothing, but in reality, David heard everything he needed to hear. And Saul says, oh man, you're just a boy. You're not ready. And David said, well, God will go with me. The same way he saved me last time, he will save me again. This time I have everything I need. And so in the midst of all the noises and the voices that David heard, what really stood in his heart was the voice of faith. How do you define yourself? What do you see yourself as? Because you will always hear lots of voices from the people around you. And it's only if you train your ears to hear God in the midst of all that noise, then you will develop a heart of faith. Let's say, there's so many people saying so many things. God, what are you saying? What do you want me to do? How can I follow you in the midst of all the noise? Because look, everyone will always have opinions. Yeah? Does your family have opinions of how you should be, who you should talk to, what you should do, who you shouldn't talk to, what you should do with your life? And so part of our challenge is that we don't really have a lack of faith. We just spend too much of our time listening to everything and then trying to figure out how do I hear God after I've spent so much of my day listening to my phone on Instagram and then listening to the advice of everybody around me. Where do I actually have the time to hear God? And so many times as Christians, we think, and I don't, do you do this, where you write goals each year? And sometimes people who write goals just to feel spiritual, they'll write one spiritual goal, and usually it is, I want to grow in my faith this year. I want to be a stronger person of faith. How do you really do that? Part of the way you do that is by learning to control the voices that you're constantly listening to, because when you listen to it over and over again, it begins to shape who you are. The songs you listen to over and over again, the reels that you're scrolling past over and over again, that thing that people say that you repeat in your head long after it's done, and it's going over and over and over again in your head, and you're hearing those voices, and that blocks out your ability to hear the voice of God. Hear me. Because God in reality is trying to speak to you if you'd only listen. Let me skip forward. How do we really hear God's voice? Many times when we read these great stories, what we do as good Christians is we assume ourselves to be the character of the story. Like, man, if this is David and Goliath, obviously I'm David. But in reality, if we actually have to place ourselves in the story, can I just give you a reality check for a second? If you have to place yourself in the story, we are the sheep. David was a shepherd in the wilderness, and so he left his sheep to go and fight Goliath. If you have to find yourself in the story, you and I are the sheep. Because in reality, David picked up his stone, Jesus picked up his cross. David went and fought Goliath, Jesus went and fought sin and death. David defeated Goliath so that all of Israel will have the victory. Jesus defeated Satan so that we can be saved and have life. We are the sheep. We are the sheep. And what good sheep do is they follow the shepherd. The shepherd fights on our behalf. If you have giants in your life, as you follow Jesus, He will fight on your behalf. The failures you have experienced, the rejection you have experienced, everything when you feel like your life is totally out of your control, how do you solve that? The way you solve it is not by, I will now show them. The way you solve it is by saying, I'm going to follow Jesus, who is my shepherd. And everything, it's like Psalms 23. How many of you know Psalms 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or in other words, everything I need will be found as I follow Him. As I hear His voice. Sam, can you come up and play? How do we live lives of faith where we overcome the giants in our life? How do we actually be Christians that overcome? by following our Good Shepherd, who fights our battles. We trust in Him. We learn to hear His voice. That is why Jesus says in John 10, I am the Good Shepherd. A good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And then it goes on and it says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I will give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will be able to snatch them out of my hand. How do I live a life of faith and overcome the giants in my life? You could do it on your own, or you can realize that you are the sheep following your Good Shepherd that has already won the victory for you. What are you worried about? What are the things where the disappointments still hurt you? What are the pains that you have not fully dealt with, and you still, when you think about it, it still hurts a little bit? As you follow your Good Shepherd and you listen to His voice, can you trust that He will take care of it? Can you trust that as I follow Jesus, everything I need will be found in Him? You know, Sneha's not here, but I really do want to appreciate her. She passed her MD this week. And she got 0.7% less than the state topper, while being 9 months pregnant. Not easy. She's not here, so clap once she comes back. But sure, thanks. But look, here's why I appreciate her. Because she had a paper on Monday morning, and on Sunday night she was here at church serving God. And there's just this conviction in our hearts that as we put God first and follow Jesus, everything I need will be taken care of. The Lord is my shepherd, and everything I need can be found in His hand, and I don't need to worry because He will take care of all the things that I'm so worried about. And I don't need to control my success, and I don't need to control my future, and I don't need to control every relationship that I'm in, and I don't need to control every situation I'm in, because I have a God who is in control. So the invitation becomes, can I trust Him and follow Him and know that He will fight for me? Amen. Can we stand? Father, help us to trust You tonight. Help us, God. Help us to realize that everything we so desire actually comes from You. God, You said in Your word that You have come to give us life, an abundant life. And so we come tonight, and God, we repent for the times where we think we can do everything ourselves. God, for all the times that we have tried to live life in our control, God, we repent and come to You and recognize that You are the source of our life. You are the shepherd that has gone ahead of us, laid down Your life for us, and in You we are saved. In You we are made whole. In You we are wealthy. In You we are prosperous. In You we have peace. In You we have joy. And I pray, God, let us never forget that everything we have and everything we need and everything we ever will need is only found in You. So God, I pray that we would be the sheep that faithfully follow You, knowing that You are a good shepherd. If we feel like our hearts are wandering back and forth, God, we come back and say, lead us. Lead us and guide us. Lord, would You be our shepherd and help us to realize that as we follow You, we lack nothing. give us the faith, God, to overcome the giants in our life. God, I pray right now, even for those of us who feel like our life is full of noise, and when we go to bed at night, we lie in our pillow and our mind just cannot seem to shut off because it's rolling on and on and on. I pray, God, would you come and bring your peace tonight? God, let every anxiety and depression and restlessness bow its name to Jesus. God, I even pray against sleeplessness. God, I thank you that it says that you give those you love rest. And so I pray, God, that we would find rest in you. God, that we would find peace in you. That we would find the purpose of our lives, God, in you without striving. As we trust in you, God, that we would begin to realize that we can have everything we need and have the peace that comes with it, because that peace comes from you. So, Father, do a work in our heart tonight and help us to trust you more and more. In Jesus' name.